Hello everyone, I'm Brian Holtkamp. I'm a Ph.D. student over at University of Houston. I work with the VAST team, which is the Visualization, Automation, Simulation, and Training team, where we use serious games to try to solve problems in various different areas. And so the paper I'm presenting today is Enhancing Subject Matter Assessment Utilizing Augmented Reality and Serious Game Techniques. And a mouthful of that is, we went through and we made an AR tool and wanted to see, does it train people? Because right now, that's where the industry is going. So, getting started, I'm going to do a brief introduction on Augmented-Reality, which after, and ask the first question of getting the, has anybody played Pokemon Go? We saw a lot of hands, so I think I can skip to that one pretty quickly and go into what problem we were looking at, some background on some of the previous research in that area, what we did, what we saw, and what we can conclude from it. So getting started, I can't do the Pokemon Go question, that was one I had planned, but so who all has actually worn an augmented reality headset? So like a Magic Leap or a HoloLens? Okay, only a handful. So who's familiar with them? Okay, a bit more, awesome, okay. So right now, I'm doing some of the press material for the HoloLens 2 for Microsoft, which it seems like it doesn't want to play. But so the HoloLens 2 is an augmented reality headset. So with augmented reality, we're getting into the same assumption of we have holograms and 3D objects and interactions that are put into the world around you, and the device has knowledge of your surroundings, so it knows that there's a podium here, it knows that there's a wall here, ceilings, floors, and you can use that to your advantage when trying to make a compelling interaction. And so with that technology, we can go through and use that with the HoloLens to superimpose those into your world, and you have different input techniques like your hands, your voice, and if we go through and we see for mobile ones, it seems like I lost focus somehow. There we go. So this is from WWDC of Apple showing off their shared AR experiences. We can go through and you can have your mobile AR, just like Pokemon Go, just like Niantic's Harry Potter game, have a shared experience and interact with the user and use these technologies to build compelling experiences. So now that this stuff is finally getting out of it's super expensive and only academia and industry has their hands on it and getting into more everyday people can have this powerful device in your pocket, we can go through and actually start talking about where it's starting to be used. And so, biggest one, if you're going to talk about AR, you're going to talk about visualization. So right now we're in the era of big data. We have big data, we have big data sets. We need big interactions to understand what's coming out of that data. So getting into that, then getting into simulations. We see people going through and saying, if I need to know what's going on an oil rig, I can't physically go out there and see what's happening. Somebody can make a simulation and put me in there and I can understand what's happening. Medical. I can't see what my spleen looks like, and I'm not wanting to get cut open to find out. So if someone goes there and make a model that's somewhat accurate, so I can have like a doctoral talk about it in my clinicals, I can gain more understanding from it. And lastly, one of the ones that we're going to go a little bit more detail on is industrial applications, because heavy machinery, giant factories, those things are tremendous things to simulate. And so we can go there and take a subset of that and better train people to be safe, be effective, understand what they're working with. We can have a smarter workforce, a faster workforce, and a healthier workforce. So looking at the industrial applications, pretty much they fall into three major buckets from what we were looking at. They either are talking about trying to understand an object of interest. So if I'm going to be working on a motor of some sort, they can go there and tell me, what kind of motor is it? What am I getting myself into? What do I need to know about this? What safety information do I need to know? Or how do I manipulate it? If I need to go there and tear open a car engine, I want to go there and make sure I do it correctly. I want to know, do I take this bolt off? What torque do I use? What do I need to do this correctly? And lastly, telling me about my environment. If I'm going to go out into like say this school, I don't know where the buildings are, so I got to go through and get information of, okay, I'm looking at this building, it knows that I'm in this location, give me guidance to get to ABT. I literally used that this morning. It's a powerful technology that we are continuing to explore. So with all this technology coming available and getting into people's hands, because you can just load up Unity, load up Unreal, jump into a game engine and put this stuff together, how do we find out if it's effective? If we're going to go through and start building these tools, we need to understand if people using these tools are actually getting benefit from it. So that goes into my problem. If we want to determine effectiveness of training, we need to do some sort of assessment. And so assessment, that's literally a bachelor's degree in a nutshell. You go there and you take tons of tests and it determines whether or not you understand the material. So how do we define an assessment? So this is some of the terminology I'm using throughout the paper. A subject matter. So subject matter is just some common body of knowledge. It's some sort of knowledge that's saying like, hey, this is all talking about biology, this is all talking about chemistry, this is all talking about mechanics. And also, when it comes to a subject matter, it has to have a reason to be taught. It has to be something contextually relevant. Like I could go there and say, what's the president in 1947, but if I'm talking about biology, I don't think that's really relevant at that moment in time. So when I'm talking about subject matter, it's a common body of knowledge, and it has to be something related to what I'm trying to train. Secondly, it needs to be standardized in some way, shape, or form. I need to go there and make sure that the stuff I'm teaching has been rigorously tested and repeated, and that I'm teaching them what to expect in the real world. I need to make sure that these theories have been confirmed, and if I'm teaching the material, that they understand what they're getting themselves into so that they can be safe and effective and all the previously mentioned attributes. So, assessments. What are assessments? Well, the most common one is pen and paper exams. Those are the ones that we've all been through in various different stages of our life. Then there's always recitations. Can you talk the talk? Can you tell me and make me feel like you have a good understanding of the material that I taught you? And lastly, demonstrations. Show me you can do it. If I went there and trained you, show me that you can do what you said that you've been trained to do. So, with all this information put together, we had to go there and see a person who was trained in a subject matter, who performed well when doing a traditional assessment, will also do well in an augmented reality assessment. So that's sort of the operating conditions that we started venturing into this work. So let's go there and talk about some of the stuff that was previously done. So one of the ones that we first bumped into was Arano et al., who went through and made a HoloLens Alzheimer's memory tool. And so what they were doing is they were having patients with Alzheimer's who wanted to go there and practice their short-term memory retention. So what they would do is they would go there and present them with boxes on the table, and the HoloLens would go there and show it onto the table and present it in front of them. They would have to go there and click on it and remember what items were under what boxes and start matching them in pairs. So it's a game from, that was a mini game back in Super Mario Bros. 3, but now adapted into the real world context and focus on a very, very important subject. And so with this, they got through and saw that by doing it in this game style, they had higher levels of engagement compared to just doing it with paper and you flip the piece of paper up and down. You have to go through and get them something visually interesting, drawing their attention, and get more engagement out of it. Another one showing a high level engagement was Das et al., who went through and did an augmented reality trainer for introductory programmers. So this is a really common example that they use for training programs to start thinking algorithmically. I give the computer a set of instructions, they perform the instructions and do the task in front of us. And so this one, they went through and they mimicked something similar to the Swift Playgrounds on iPad, where they have to go through and they click and add in the instructions you want the program to do and have it perform it, and they saw higher levels of retention and engagement with the students. But when it comes to these students, they wanted to go through and try to promote student engagement, but I didn't see too much data on how they actually performed. So we wanted to go through and start exploring that a bit more. So come into the assessment tool. So when we started building out this assessment tool, we could build it about anything. We can go there and start trying to build simulators about particle physics if we wanted to, but I'm not an expert in particle physics. So we wanted to try to do something a little bit closer to home. So what we ended up having is we had previously worked with the University of Houston Construction Management Department, and they have a class training on OSHA, so workplace safety training. And so we went through and we started talking with them, and they started being our subject matter experts, so that we can make sure that the corpus that we're teaching them is vetted by somebody who knows it, lives it, breathes it, teaches it every single day. And so we went through and we did that. They went through and built us the paper exam that I'm going to talk about later, and they also assisted us in building the HoloLens tool. So OSHA, for any non-Americans or people who are familiar with it, is Occupational Safety and Hazards Administration. It's a government organization that is focused on making sure that people have a safe workplace, that they don't have to fear for their lives whenever they're doing their day-to-day activities. And so this happens to be taught as a junior level course in the University of Houston Bachelor of Construction Management degree program, of which they have to complete a 10-hour class of covering OSHA safety topics. So for those topics we covered, we wanted to stick to ones that are more focused on understanding something that you can see at a glance, something that's more visually something that you have to recognize visually on the fly if you're in like at a construction site per se. So is somebody wearing the proper protective equipment? Do they have a hard hat? Do they have steel-toed boots? Are they wearing a fall harness so that they don't fall off a building? Are signs properly displayed? Are you able to see them? Are they the correct signs to warn the person about what's coming up? Scaffolding. Scaffolding is propped up structures that help you get higher in a building, and well, they're not the strongest, and you have to make sure you use them correctly and you're safe on them. Fall protection goes hand in hand with scaffolds. Cranes. Cranes are giant machines that can go through and do tremendous amounts of damage if used incorrectly. We want to make sure that people are approaching them cautiously, approaching them safely, and doing all the things they need to do to use them effectively. Motor vehicles. Somebody's driving a dump truck. You better hope that they're driving it correctly. Ladders also. That ends up being a whole separate chapter on like how does someone properly use a ladder? Do they use it safely? Do they not put themselves in danger? So with all that in mind, here's an actual tool in action, if it will actually play. Here we go. So for this tool, since it's augmented reality, we go through and we let the user first place it into a location. And then in there we have both touch controls, voice controls to allow them to manipulate. We're going to give them as convenient of a UX as possible. So you see various simulated workers all throughout the work site, and you see vehicles moving around. You have people welding, you have dump trucks, you have cranes, and you have a forklift that are all objects that can be randomized to have safe and unsafe properties to each. You might have workers that aren't wearing the correct equipment. You might have trucks that are doing the incorrect action. They might be in the wrong spot. All these things are randomized and presented to the student who's doing the assessment. So from there, let's look at some of the smaller pieces. On the left, we see a worker who's properly equipped. They have the hard hat, the safety glasses, the high visibility vest, the boots, the gloves, everything. And on the right, we see one wearing absolutely nothing correct at all. They blend in with the background, they don't wear any of the proper safety equipment, and they're a very high risk on a work site. You also see stuff like the person sitting on top of a ladder. That is extremely unsafe and should not be performed, even though people do it all the time. And also, there's welders who aren't wearing welding masks. They're not going to see for far long. And a bunch of other, like if you look at the forklift there, it's carrying a bunch of pipes that aren't strapped together at all. So in the real world, they would actually physically all fall off and roll around. And lastly, you can also see the scaffolding being presented. Some of the workers here don't have the safety harnesses on, so that if they were to take a fall, then they're actually meeting the ground and saying getting caught by a safety wire. And then lastly, we can go there and see the prompts here. Each one of these prompts is a separate true-false question, and we treat all four of them independently. But they're all related to whichever worker or vehicle that they click on in the AR environment. And so each of these are randomized based on what they see in the world. And for some of them that don't have as many applicable things like the forklift or the crane, we have random ones that are always false, that the students have to go through and recognize that those are things that aren't true about what they see in the world. So getting into what we actually did with it. So we went and we actually handed this to students who were taking the OSHA safety course. They had to go through and wait until they were at least the 6th lecture where they have covered all 7 of those topics. And we went through and we grouped them into cohorts of 4. That was partially a limiting factor because we only had 4 HoloLenses available at the time because we had to borrow some from our friends. But at the same time, it also went through and gave them to be small little cohorts so they all went together. They weren't taken to a random isolated room and awkwardly said, here's this device, please put it on and do something. So with that, we first started with a traditional demographic survey, like when they saw age, where they are in their program, and if they ever worn an AR device before, and also what's their years of experience with AR or VR. Then we went and did the paper exam that was produced by the lecturer for the course. It was a 14-problem exam, I believe, and it was covering the exact same subset of 7 topics. It was covering those particular items, and they just went there and did the paper exam, like how you would traditionally would in the class. Then they were brought to a separate room that was a bit wider open so that they could walk around and use the AR tool for 15 minutes. So when they came in, they were handed the AR tool, they got acquainted with it, and at the beginning, there was like a button you can click to start, and pretty much we prompted them to click start, and then we started the timer for 15 minutes. The students could choose whenever they felt that they have covered the work site completely, and they can say that, okay, I'm done now, this is what I'm presenting, this is my results. Then they would go through and do a post-assessment survey of like, what did you like about it? They had some open answer and some Likert scale questions to say what they preferred about it. And then, since they were in cohorts, we allowed them to sit down and have a small group discussion with some questions to go through and say, hey, like, talk about what you felt and let them bounce ideas off each other so that we can get a better opinion of how they felt about using the tool. So let's get to the meat of it with the results. So for the paper exam, we saw that they were in the 65 region, and with the AR exam, they were in the 50% region. We went through and saw, though, that there was, for the students who performed well on paper, they also performed well in the AR tool. We saw a correlation there. But there's one big glaring thing here, that if they're performing as well, why are those numbers like 15 points apart? So whenever we started looking into the debrief data, we saw that one of the main reasons, or actually main complaints from the students, was that the input mechanism was quite difficult. So if you're ever having to use a HoloLens, it has cameras on the front, and you have to do this gesture where you have to snap down your index finger to your thumb. And it has to recognize from just a camera from your perspective that you're doing that click and you have it centered on the right location. And so that particular UX seemed to have been a hindrance on their performance whenever working with the tool. And also, AR is a pretty new thing, and they have to go through and get accustomed to using that particular tool. Looking at a bit more into the more descriptive parts of it, a lot of people like the real life and visual aspects of the tool, so they can go through and see like, hey, I see a ladder in this virtual world, that's how I would see it if I'm on a work site. And 15 of the 16 preferred the AR tool to the paper. But some of the ones that people complained was not being controlled. They felt like they weren't controlling the tool well. And 7 of the 16 said, once they got it, that's when they started feeling comfortable. And so there was obviously a learning curve there that we didn't have compensation for. And then also one person pointed out that the paper tests the specifics that that general tool can't cover. I can't go there and tell you if like this thing is exactly 5 feet long and they have to check 5 versus 5.5 feet from that far away. It doesn't make sense. And so in conclusion, what we did is we put together this tool, we handed a trial of an OSHA safety subject matter, and we saw comparable performance between the pen and paper and the AR tool. Some things that we definitely need to do in the future is look into that UI UX issue. The HoloLens 2 makes it where you don't have to do that gesture, you can just tap with a fingernail, so that might be an improvement in the future. Explore the subject matters. We only did one highly specific topic. Let's go find some more and give those a shot. And lastly, one feedback I got from a committee member was, compare that to an actual quiz. If I'm doing a pen and paper exam, I'm hitting each problem piece by piece, not this giant diorama of moving actors. So it's something to be considered of, maybe making a smaller scale version that's like, here's a person on a ladder, tell me what's wrong kind of situation, to be more one-to-one with the quiz. And so, that's it. Oh, I'm pointing to you.
Myself? No, okay, sorry. Thank you for a great talk. I could easily see like the OSHA training thing simply as like a computer game, not AR. So what advantages did the AR bring?
So the AR, whenever we wanted to go there and try, we wanted to see giving somebody able to see the environment with the context of a lot of different actors' emotions. So something I did highlight in the video that I can cover in the paper a bit more is that when those trucks are backing up, there's actually multiple workers that are doing different signals to, like, essentially one of them is telling them to come on, but another worker is walking in a different direction. And so there's a bit more context that like you can maybe simulate it there, but we wanted to go there and try letting the person have the physicality to walk around as if they were like at a table, looking at it from a bird's eye, and looking at it with a lot of context. But yes, that is actually something that another committee member brought up that we wanted to explore. Let's take this and put it into as a 3D game and see if we have comparable results. And also, we wanted to compare it against VR too. We just haven't gotten the chance to build it up yet. Oh, both of y'all. Both have your hands up.
So, thank you for the great talk. I have a question and a follow-up. So basically, I just want to know, like, the result that you were showing shows that the gamification had a negative effect or something like that. So I was wondering, like, if it was like a statistically significant also, and if so,
sorry.
Yeah, and if so, like you said, like it may be because of the design issues that it has. So if you fix the design issues, do you feel that are you going to get promising results, or there may be some other reasons?
Since I haven't built it yet, I can't confirm if it's gonna be positive or not.
Okay.
I honestly am very
Just
curious
ask
of
me
it.
your opinion. Yeah.
In my opinion, I feel like we do need to explore this as a medium and like compare it to AR and VR and the normal traditional game, like on a flat 2D panel approach, and compare those and contrast them and see the pros and cons of each. That's the meat I really want to get into, and this is just the first step into it. Getting onto the statistical significance part, we did see significance on just the correlation of the pen and paper results to the AR results on just those, like the average, and that was the only thing we saw on that. But we have to go there and like with n equals 16, this is just pretty much more of just a case study that we need to ramp this thing up, get it a little bit bigger, get more data in there so that we can actually get more confidence in that result. Yes.
Maybe one last question.
Okay. I was going to have two short ones. Is that okay?
There's lunch break.
Okay, you already mentioned that probably the details were too small, so in the future work you're gonna have a more detailed look. So that answers one of my questions anyway. But one question on the top level is like, in the simulation at any time events occur, like accidents.
Right, so
That you could actually see the issues on that construction site.
All the workers were doing stuff in loops, so
Yeah.
they could essentially, like, for the welding, they're just doing essentially like an idle motion for the most part. Anything that was doing movement over a span of time was always doing it on a loop and on a set course. So you could see a worker walking back and forth, and so one of the incidents is walking under a crane's load. So if a crane has something in there, you don't want anybody underneath it just to be safe. And so we had one that would randomly either put it on the path towards it or on the path away from it, and that would loop within like 3 to 5 seconds. So with those, essentially there wouldn't be any events that would cause the state of the simulation to change. The simulation would just be randomized, set, and then repeated until they feel like they have satisfactorily addressed the whole entire simulation. And they whenever they went there and they addressed it by clicking on it and saying this is wrong, it would still repeat the action. It was just showing that they acknowledged that they saw that there was an issue. So they could just point out that, hey, this person is wearing a hard hat. They don't magically put a hard hat on. They just went there and recognized that this is my answer choice and nothing more.
Okay, thank you
Did I
so much,
sufficiently
Brian.
answer?